if we don't have a demonstration of why God's government is better than anyone else, we're just going to take the word for it? No, the whole purpose of earth is to be a demonstration. Don't you know that you are the little world is a lesson book to the universe? Don't you know that you are a theater to angels and men?
I think that would be a great presentation to get into, the idea of present truth. I think that would be a good segment to move so that people can understand what is present truth. I think present truth has gotten a bad name. Today, it's become present news. It's become present gossip. It becomes, it becomes Ted Wilson and Ganoon Diop. And I think men are men. They are flawed men. We should pray for men. But present truth is much more than the flaws and the errors of the church. Present truth is more than just celebration music, right? So I think if you were to give that presentation on present truth, it will be very, very good as we transition into that talk right now. Okay,
absolutely.
Let's do it.
So I think there's a lot of talk about this idea of studying to show yourselves approved, right? Rightly dividing the word of truth. And I think the question then is, well, what is truth? We're told in 2 Peter that we are to be established in present truth. So what does that look like? How do we know what present truth is? And we read in testimonies that difficult points of present truth have been reached by the earnest efforts of a few who are devoted to the work. This means that we've got to actually be desiring this and wanting to know present truth, otherwise we won't know it. And she talks about how fasting and fervent prayer to God have moved the Lord to unlock his treasures. We see how Jesus loved John. Jesus loved Daniel, right? These, God loves everyone, but there's special people who just desire it so much. I believe Ezra, with Enoch, Elijah. There are some that desire it so greatly that he unlocks it to them because they're truly asking, they're truly desiring it. And we read that he will unlock this truth to our understanding. But it's reached by earnest efforts. And so we need earnest efforts. We need to be devoted to the work. But again, the question resides is what is present truth? And I think if we start to read through, we see that there's a present church truth for the church today. So we're clear that we have a present truth for this church, for the church of the most holy place. But before 1844, there was another church. There was the apostolic church. There was the early church. They had a different present truth. We read that there was, past tense, a present truth in the days of Luther, a truth that at that time was of special importance. And so this gives us an understanding that there are actually two different groups of truth. If we want to talk about taxonomy, the two groups are precious truth and present truth. And there are many precious truths contained in the Word of God, but it is what? It is present truth that the flock needs now. And so while there are two truths, right, this ontology, this relationship between these two truths exists, but there's also a present truth. So to understand present truth, let's define what a precious truth is. We see that Adventism is a precious truth. Watching for the Messiah, that they were watching the first time, and we are to watch the second time. But if we really get in and understand what the core of Adventism is not a passive watching for the Messiah. Adventism, true Adventism, is actively hastening. 2 Peter 3:12, right? Looking for and hastening under the coming of God. Desire of Ages 6:3.3, right? This idea of we have the power to hasten the Lord's return. So Adventism is a precious truth, but if we are activated under a present truth, it becomes a present truth, knowing what that actually means. But watching, right, that's passive. The gospel message, and this is where I confuse a lot of people, so hang with me. The gospel truth is a precious truth, not a present truth. And you're going to say, whoa. Because we are told to preach the gospel into the whole world. But we did. It was preached to every creature that under heaven. Colossians, actually 5 different quotes in the New Testament that says we preached. There's also 2 quotes from the Spirit of Prophecy that after the 1260-day period, that the gospel of the kingdom of heaven at hand had been preached to all over the world as a witness. And that was what? 1843. What happened after 1843? Christ moved into the most holy place. That most holy place then allowed for present truth to appear. So again, we've defined precious truth, but what's present truth? Is it the proclamation of the first, second, and third angel's message? Because there is no other work of such great importance. So I think it would be safe to say that the first, second, and third angels' messages are present truth. But do we know what that means? Many of us, especially in Adventism, look to the idea about the health message. Shouldn't the health message be included in our present truth? Surely this is it. This is what we read. We read that when you make the people intelligent concerning the principles of health reform, you do much to prepare the way for the introduction of present truth. But what this does is actually divides it, actually. And it says that the health message is a preparatory truth that leads to a present truth. You catch that? Again, I'm making a lot of enemies on this call right now, and I get that. They're going to say, well, Rob, you don't believe that the gospel message is our present truth? I think it's precious. I think it's incredibly important. The everlasting gospel is what we need to be focused on, not the original commission. And even in that, to understand the everlasting gospel, we need principles of health reform. And just to make the people on the call a little bit more upset, we'll throw this out there for you. It has been clearly presented to me that God's people are to take a firm stand against meat eating. Like, whoa, Rob, you just touched the third wire out here, right? But how can those seeking to become pure, refined, and holy, that they may have the companionship of heavenly angels, continue to use food, anything that has been harmful as affecting the soul and body? But what's the real problem? Because if we go back to this, we get this idea that the health message is to prepare the introduction of present truth. So what am I talking about when I bring up meat? I'm talking that a diet of flesh tends to develop animalism. A development of animalism lessens spirituality, rendering the mind incapable of understanding truth. And so all these who are wanting to desire present truth yet still eating meat are going to be incapable of understanding even what I'm talking about right now. So all those that are going to be in the comments bashing me for this right here, let's be kind on them, because they are incapable of understanding truth. We read here, when you make the people intelligent concerning the principles of health reform, this prepares a way for the introduction of present truth. So the preparatory work of the health message is so that we understand truth. So we need a preparatory work in order to then present present truth. And we say, well, how do we get this? How do we get the word out there? You know, health message, we've heard that it's the right hand of the gospel, right? Medical ministry is the focus. It's the crux. It's what everything is supposed to be focused on. But if you actually read it, if you really read it, and by the way, I think that medical ministry is a term that needs to stop being utilized, because I think it's actually damaging because nobody understands what it means. I think you can expand that into far greater understanding of what medical ministry work really is. But understand that the health message is an entering wedge in order to what? Make a way for other truths to reach the heart. So what we find is that the medical ministry work is not the final purpose. We are not to be creating sanitariums and treatment centers in order to validate that we are who we want to be. It's an entering wedge. It's a way that we can introduce the health message in order to help people understand present truth. And so ultimately, this is a prescriptive ability, right? The idea that if I have a health problem, right, I'm looking for a prescription on how to then be healthier. This includes the health message, which then leads to the three angels' messages. But there are other entering wedges. We find missional business is another entering wedge. Invent some way of becoming acquainted with people. It's a wedge. And so this idea that there are prescriptive wedges, things that people actually need, when the Waldensians, they used to go out as merchants because they would be spurned as ministers. And we understand that more and more people are being jaded against the concept of Christianity because people are breaking the third commandment. They're taking the Lord's name in vain. And if we would understand that medical ministry work and missional business work, both of those are entering wedges. They're ways to meet people where they are with a problem that they're having and be able to solve that problem, leading them to the health message, leading them then to present truth. So what else is there? Because not everybody has a health problem. And I believe that country living is another entering wedge. It ultimately is the preventative message. So rather, people that are not sick are not going to be interested in medical ministry, but people that want preventative will be very much interested in country living. And this is a message of coming in contact with God and putting our reliance in Him. And so this is where we start the concept of outpost living. right? This is this come and see what we're doing. And we're told that we're to work the cities from outposts. And yet, it's the broken blueprint. We don't seem to follow this method. But it's something I'm actually about to put a series out on my channel about how to form an outpost. It's going to be a massive amount of content. If you're interested in that, head over there and put a comment in one of the most recent video that you're interested in that. If I can get 100 people on it, I'm going to go ahead and launch the course for free on the YouTube. Ultimately, what we find is that there's a linear arrangement, that we need to start following God's way of doing things, and that's the outpost living. That lends us to this idea of ministry, missional work. And missional work is finding any sort of prescriptive way, any sort of way we can invent ways to become acquainted with people, pointing forward to country living, pointing forward to health. We can then use preventative measures to talk about the health message. But the health message is a preparatory truth to lead to then what? Present truth. So the question is what is present truth? Is the three angels' message the present truth? And I think that some people don't even know what the three angels' messages are. And I think that this is really at the crux of the problem of why we are where we are. It's because we haven't studied to show ourselves approved. And if you really get into the ontology of the three angels' messages, we find out that there's actually also another message, Revelation 18. And so if we were to start at the beginning, we understand that at the beginning, we need to restore true worship. And this is this idea of, we talked about the three angels' messages. If we know the answers to these questions, right? By the way, Revelation 14 to 12, it's 6 to 12. It's literally the entire Bible study is found in those verses. Like this spawns out so many different sub-questions. What is the everlasting gospel? Who's it to preach to? What is the fear of God? Who do we worship? When is the judgment hour? It's all found in those two verses. And then we can look at the next. Okay? We need to depart false to develop the true. This is the second angel's message. Babylon has fallen, and it's made what? All nations drink of the wine of the wrath of fornication. So we're now participating in a false system of worship. It's a false system of living. It's a false mental state. We are enslaved. We no longer have any sort of cognitive sovereignty. And this is the crux of the debate, really, which is on freedom of conscience. We are in systems that enslave us. And what I think is so ironic is that, when we look into who is Babylon and what is this wine, we understand that this message is coming out of the system. It's coming out of the supply chain. It's actually like growing our own food and being more reliant. We all want to come up together as revolutionaries. But what does Bill Mollison say about revolutionaries? And I quote him a lot. Bill Mollison says the futility of revolutionaries who are dependent on the system that they want to attack. And I'm going to say that quote 1,000 times more in the future. If we don't understand that we cannot fight against a system that we're dependent on. And this is also a lesson to the Adventist Church. Because if we are taking money from a government, we cannot fight against it. So when the government says, hey, we are going to be having a Sunday law, a national day of worship, how do we fight against that when we're not prepared financially to stand on our own little feet like big boys? If you can't stand on your own feet as an organization, maybe you don't need to exist. Okay? Now, do I think that the Adventist Church is Babylon? No, I don't. But I'm saying I'm a businessman, right? And a business that can't operate financially needs to retool what they're doing. And maybe there needs to be a little more meat from the pulpit and a little less milk. Maybe we actually need to hear for once from our pulpits, righteous by faith. And because I think that would fill our pews, we would not have a problem with tithe if we gave the message that was supposed to be given for our time. If we ever heard present truth once from a pulpit, I promise that church would likely be full. And yet we don't. But this brings us to the third angel's message. And this is the most important message of our time. This message, though, is misunderstood. When we read this, if we read through this message, it's almost a counter to what's true message is. It's what's the mark? What's God's wrath? Is there ever burning hell? Right? We read all these things about what does this mean, no rest? And then at the very, very end, we get the clue. We get the clue at the very end that says, you just read the whole message wrong, dummy. Start over. And that's when we go to Revelation 18. In Revelation 18, we read the whole thing over again, starting with the second angel's message, But we come back to this idea, it's not about the mark of the beast, it's about how do I get the seal of God? It's not about God's wrath, it's how do I have God's love? How do I show God's love? It's not about is there ever burning hell, it's about how can I have ever burning life, everlasting life. It's not about, how do I not have rest? It's about how do I understand the rest God wants to give us? And this is only found in the faith of Jesus. And so again, when we read these, we read them likely through the message of a watchman, and that's our problem. We need to read these through the lens of a light bearer and actually offer something that people want, not just keep telling them something that they shouldn't want. We need to demonstrate a better way, and that's outpost living. It's demonstrating a better way of living and showing that, look, we're off supply chain. We're growing our own food. We're showing what intellectual sovereignty looks like. We're showing what freedom of conscience looks like. And it's God's way. But we've got to realize what's at risk, because the three angels' messages are not the whole story. That's what we're missing. We have to understand the great controversy that surrounds us and actually acknowledge what's at risk. And when we realize that, when we put our focus on what's really going on around us, then we'll actually have our true marching orders. Up to this point, we are like a bunch of cadets with no true marching orders, without any real orders. And what's the problem with this is that we're going around and we're just firing off things because we don't understand things, right? If we were to really get into who we're supposed to be, we're told ultimately that we're an army, right? The Church of Christ may be fitly compared to an army, that we would be good soldiers of Christ, to choose him as a soldier, right? To fight the good fight of faith. But this is a war of faith. It's not a physical battle. And that's the problem. Everybody's ready to take up arms in a physical battle, but they're forgetting that it's a spiritual battle. They don't see with spiritual eyes. They go to church, they sit in their pew, and they think, oh, the other side of that church, the other side of this pew, oh, I hate them. And yet they don't recognize that that's because of all the unseen forces that are going on. If we truly got into it, we would find that we do not understand the great conflict going on in visible agencies. And this is why we are divided by politics. This is why there are culture wars when there should be class warfare. This is why we're fighting each other even. And even if we go to class warfare, it still doesn't really contemplate the idea that we need to be fighting against spiritual warfare. And so we have to understand that this is no make-believe conflict. And this will, believe me, brothers and sisters, we need to be the ones that are actively taking part in this. Because we can read that statement one more time. It says, it is not to mimic battles which we're engaged. We have the most powerful adversaries, and it rests with us to determine which shall win. So it's on us to determine which side wins the great controversy. I don't think we realize that. I think we are just sitting here and we read 2 Peter 3:12 like, well, we're looking for the coming of Jesus. We don't read the part that says, no, actively hastening. We are civilians on the sidelines when we need to be military warriors. We are not passive civilians. So stop acting like a civilian soldier. And maybe there's a little bit too much of my military training coming out in me. But it does feel like, okay, maybe I got the attention of some of my fellow, military veterans, right? And they're like, don't worry, Rob, I'm armed to the teeth. I'm ready for the government to come take my guns. Man, you got the wrong idea, brother. Put up thy sword against his place.
Yep.
For all that they will take the sword shall perish with the sword. Look, I know I'm not making friends here today. I'm just here to speak the truth as I see it.
That's right.
And let it lay where it lays. We are not to be armed to the teeth thinking that we're going to defend God with bullets. Do not envy the violence or choose any of their ways. We're not supposed to be fighting physical battles. Some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. That's what it's all about. So stop fighting against flesh. That's all we see we're doing here. We just keep fighting against people when we recognize that we're not actually fighting against flesh and blood. So when are we going to recognize that? When do we recognize who our real enemy is? It's the rulers against the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. You say, okay, now Rob's getting there again. I knew he'd be back, right? I knew Rob would come out, right? Not physical weapons, okay, but we're going to fight against words, against these rulers of the world, right? We're going to take aim against the infiltrators. Yeah, Rob's talking about the Jesuits again. I like it now, right? We get people excited, right? Maybe while he's at it, maybe he's going to talk about those hypnotized loyalists again, right? Who value community over conviction. you know? Maybe he's going to take a swing at those protectors that have no backbones. Yeah? But what's happening when we do this? Do you see what's coming out? We imagine ourselves as we do this as reformers. And yet we're not reformers when we talk like this. We're rebels. And so this is where we find out what the real problem is. Yes, it started with the infiltrators, but it's perpetuated with the rebels. And I think that if we see what's going beyond the scene, this is engaged by fanaticism. It's the infiltrators, the instigators are planting seeds in the rebels' minds. We need reformed rebels. We need to have an army of reformed rebels. If they understood this, that they are just as much as the problem, we would come inside the fold. We would then have the backs of the reformers who've been preaching this all along, who are now ostracized outside the church. Why? Because they're grouped in the same group as the rebels. Anyone that tries to speak out is like, oh yeah, but you're part of that same group. And so if the rebels would hold their peace, right, work with the reformers, be a reformer, we would then be able to develop relationships with the protectors. Help them see that they're not fighting two battles. Help them to see they're only fighting one. And in this, we would then be able to bring them back to the state that they are in, of protectors, the original state. And they would then be able to put their focus and attention on the root of the cause that started all this, which is those loyalists who allow infiltrators to plant seeds of division while they think they're trying to maintain unity. If they could see the light, and if our church leadership would just humble themselves a little bit, what would come out of that? That this conviction of God supersedes loyalty to man or any institution. And from this, the noise would die down. And what we would find is that there would no longer be a need for reformers. And this is what I don't think people understand. There is no need for reformers as long as we're all together as protectors of the center. And those that are on the extremes, we need to put them under a microscope. They need to really look more at their own heart, figure out their patterns. Are they speaking truth, or are they just being led by delusion? We need to make a decision. Do we continue to fight against God and his church? Or do we humble ourselves and enlist in the banner of Christ, letting him fight this battle for us, becoming active participants in hastening the Lord's return? We need to accept the call to arms. Christ is calling for volunteers to enlist under his standards and bear the banners of the cross before the world. And this is what we need to be focused on, an army of workers. How soon might the end come? So what are our marching orders? Do we even know? Because it feels like we don't know. It feels like we've gone out there, we're ready to deploy in the army of God, but we don't even know what our orders are. And so we're out shooting at people, right? Metaphorical bullets, thinking this is the mission that God gave us, but it's not the mission, right? We're priding ourselves on how well we know, our doctrine. And yet, we're utilizing these commandments as weapons. We're weaponizing God's law. Right? We may see ourselves as a good watchman, but we're missing the bigger picture, because God is a God of love. And the entire great controversy is demonstrating God's character. And so this is what we need to be focused on. Right? We need to be light bearers of God's love. And I'll tell you right now, I'm the biggest offender of this. This is what I'm actively trying to learn. I'm not speaking from a high place. Okay, I'm the worst of all of you, the worst of everyone. I have just a sense of just such. I'm actually praying that God heals my anger inside. It's not even anger. It's disappointment. It's this idea of like, why don't we wake up? Why do we have to feel so alone in these groups and divided? It doesn't feel like there's any unity in our church. What's the point? We need to come together, and it starts with a love relationship with Christ. Because if we don't have a love relationship with Christ, we'll never be able to reflect. We talk about, well, what is the role of a light bearer? There's no light inside of a light bearer. When he went up on the mountain, God invited him up. And he was with the Lord. And when he came down, his face was so bright, they put a bag over his head, right? That's what they did. I mean, they were like, we can't see you, because it would consume them because of the light. And so if we want to make it to the end, if we want to see Christ return as we say we do, are we going to be able to see his face? Will we see Christ's face when he returns, or will it be too bright for us? We need to start thinking about how we can be light bearers of God's love. And instead of thinking of ourselves as soldiers with a bayonet, think of ourselves as medics in God's army that are there to heal ourselves, heal then others. That's what we need to be focused on. And then you may say, well, then Rob, what about this quote here? Think that I come not to send peace on earth, but I came to send a sword. And you're like, okay, what's that all about? Because now Rob's contradicting himself. He just said that we're supposed to be medics, but why do we have swords? And I think that's the whole point, is that we don't understand what the role of the sword is. If we truly understood the role of the sword, it's to divide. And it's not to divide in the sense of the Hegelian dialectic where we're pulling people from one side or the other. No, it's just to cut, right? It's to cut through the noise and to be a dividing of the word of truth, to show what's true and what's not true. But the only way we can do that is to study to show ourselves approved. And that's really what it comes back to. It comes back to, are we studying to show ourselves approved? Do we understand what's at stake? Do we understand ultimately what's at risk? Because if we don't know what's at risk, we won't understand what our marching orders are. So the question is, what's the purpose of giving the three angels' messages? Why do the three angels' messages even exist? What's the purpose of that? Is that the end goal, or is that another step? The same way the health message is a step, the same way that country living is a step. We find that God's purpose in giving the third angel's message to the world is to prepare a people to stand true to him through the investigative judgment. How many of us have heard that from our pulpits before? How many of us have heard this quote from our pulpits? Probably not very many. And so the three angels' messages is only there to realize our true purpose. And if we actually understand our true purpose as Adventists, we would be stopped with all this chaotic right versus left, us versus them. We would get it. So what's the purpose? What's the purpose that we carry all lines of work in the cause? Why do we carry forward in the cause every line of work? What's the purpose? We see that God's purpose in giving the three angels' message to the world is to prepare a people to stand true to him during the investigative judgment. Christ is going to leave. For those who don't understand what I'm talking about here, you got to look at the sanctuary system. Christ is right now in the most holy place. That means that we are living in the anti-typical Day of Atonement. That means that everything is different than it was in 1843. That means that we are now a people of the most holy place. And we have to stop acting like children of the holy place and move with Christ into the most holy place. And this movement is preparing people to stand through the investigative judgment, which means that they would have, be holy as I am holy, that they would have adopted the righteousness of Christ, not from our own works. But this is our purpose. This is actually the purpose of why we have sanitariums, publishing houses, schools, treatment centers, food, every line of work. Every line of work is to point back to develop a people to prepare true. So every line of work, which by the way, these are the wedges that we talked about earlier, these wedges are there to do preparatory work, which is the health message, to lead to present truth, which ultimately leads to our purpose. So what is present truth? Let's read it. Let us strive with all the power that God has given us to be among the 144,000. And you say, whoa. If you say that to people, you're like, what do you want to do? Well, I want to be part of the 144,000. They're like, well, that's pretty holier now. What makes you so holy that you can be part of? Look, I don't think, to be honest with you, I don't think I'll be part of it. I don't know. I would love to be a part of it. But God's got to do a lot of work in my heart. He's got to do a lot of work in my heart to make me nicer, to make me more patient. And if he can do that, because I do believe that the Lord will finish the work he started in me, then I do believe that I can be part of 144,000. But it's not based on who I am. It's based on what I know he can do. It's also based on the idea that the rocks are going to cry out if I don't. Because I'm not hearing this message from the pulpits, brother. I'm not hearing it from most of the pulpits.
No. Unfortunately.
This is our present truth. Let us strive to be part of the 144,000. We need to remove the stigma of why we never use the word 144,000. We use it as a them versus an us. That's the problem of why Christ hasn't come. Because Ellen White told us he could have come in the first generation of Adventism, 1844 to 1884. Ellen White's very clear on that. We had a whole revival that came out of Jones and Wagner in 1888.
Yes.
That's the second generation, 1884, 1824. And then to them that hate me, to the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, but we're in the fifth generation now, 2004 to 2044. We're in the final generation. We know that because there is an end of time. So what is our role? Our primary role is to focus on being part of the 144,000. That is the role, that is present truth for the children of the most holy place.
Correct.
We are also called to evangelize. But while our gospel commission was to evangelize first and give a message of warning in the previous church, in this church, we are to be light bearers first and give a message by living a message. If we are not demonstrating what God's kingdom is from a differentiation standpoint, if we don't have a demonstration of why God's government is better than anyone else, we're just going to take the word for it? No, the whole purpose of earth is to be a demonstration. Don't you know that you are the little world is a lesson book to the universe? Don't you know that you are a theater to angels and men? These are quotes, right?
Yeah.
So we have to be a demonstration. We have to know what's going on. That's why outpost work is so important. And so we have two roles as part of the 144,000 is the first role. The second role is to help others gain access to heaven as well. But our first work is a work with ourselves. We are not called to go out and spread the gospel message when we're not living it first.
Yes.
Now, do I think that we have to wait till we're perfect? No, absolutely not. But I'm talking about a daily cycle. I had a guy that was out at my outpost and he wanted to do literature evangelism. I said, great, man. And then I asked him one day, did you have your Bible study this morning? Because he was a little bit cranky. Did you have your Bible study this morning? No. So you're telling me that you're out handing out literature on the street to people and you hadn't even checked in with God yet. You hadn't put on your armor yet. Right? This is the hypocrisy of most of us who call ourselves being evangelists, is that we have no true relationship with Christ, and yet we're out trying to pose that we have the perfect situation. And I'll tell you right now, this is why we're in the state that we're in. And so we have this concept of present truth, which is one, to strive to be part of the 144,000. Secondarily, to then, as a byproduct, help others gain access to heaven. And some people say to me, so Rob, you don't think evangelism is important? I say, it's the order, man. Do you think works is important? I do. I think our work should demonstrate our characters. But it's the order. Can you have works without faith? No. Works without faith is dead, brother. So helping others gain access to heaven without being a light bearer, without desiring to be part of the 144,000 is also dead. And this is why our evangelism is ineffective. If we would understand this and we start to demonstrate God's plan for humanity, of developing our characters, of understanding true education, then we would start moving them in the right path. We would then invent ways of reaching people. That's prescriptive methods. Right? That's the idea of medical ministry work. It's missional evangelism, but also preventative measures by bringing them out and showing them country living. Right? But this is what we're looking at. It's to be light bearers and watchmen. That is present truth. But in that order. If you have them out of order, it's like having works without faith. So, what prepares us? The health message. The health message prepares us to be light bearers and watchmen. And how do we get that message in? What's the entering wedge? Well, it's medical ministry work. It's having a sanitarium. Right? That is an entering wedge in a prescriptive method to give them the health message in order to prepare them to be a watchman, and even better yet, to be part of the 144,000. Another wedge is a restaurant. That's a missional business. Another wedge is a publishing house. This informs people, both informs about the health message, it informs about the watchman. So is the publishing house important? Critically important. But again, it's all part of the bigger piece. The same way you can't have a publishing house without maybe a sanitariums, you can't have sanitariums without restaurants and publishing houses. They all go hand in hand to show God's true plan. And this is this idea that also these missional businesses are there to sustain the work that we're doing. And that's a critical component. that it seems like most of us are missing. We say, Rob, I want to do God's work, but I got to work my full-time job. And so right now, we're actually, by the way, a little plug, we're about to launch a missional business course. It's going to be a 21-day of prayer where we really refocus our mindset on how we can take action. And so that's going to be at adventventures.org. We're going to get it's community.adventventures.org. We'll get some links out on that. But the point is this. If we understand then that this also requires training centers to prepare the light bearers, to share the health message, and to staff these missional businesses, we'll see the role, the importance of the gardens, to supply food to the restaurants, to sustain the ministries again. And all of this is the ontology or the relationship of an outpost. And so when we start seeing that the purpose of an outpost living, the purpose of country living, is a demonstration of God's love for us. We want to live how God loves us. We want to show what God's government looks like. And we need then to demonstrate the love that God has given us to others. And that will bring about the vindication of the Father. And if we could really understand that, we would get ourselves back to a point where we're a little more clear of what's going on around us. But I just ask us to really to develop our spiritual eyes. And as I wrap up here, I just want to remind us that there is spiritual warfare going on. And we truly do need to be looking at things and understanding that most of us are just being manipulated. Most of us have not developed the cognitive, really remove the cognitive biases that are entrapping us. Our heuristics are very much into, mention the word Hillary, you're going to mention crooked, right? You mention the word, liberal, you're going to be like, transgender, whatever it is. Like just ideas like we've been literally like, that's called programming. So we've got to break away from the programming, right? We've got to get to a space where we can actually think for ourselves. Like, are you even living if you don't think for yourself? Like, God has given us free will. And then, yes, we lost that free will to Lucifer in the garden. But that's what enmity is. Enmity is our ability to have free will again. So we need to have our free will, and then what we need to do is we need to give it to God. But again, I just ask that we start seeing through spiritual eyes, start seeing what the true problem is. And I really believe that if we are on one side or the other, we got to reel it in a little bit. And we've got to get back to a space where we're truly just we're not fighting against each other. We need to be looking outward, not inward. And I think that's my core point.